All right. Welcome to Inside the Grind podcast, the podcast for people building real coffee shops. Every episode, we sit down with someone who's deep in the day to day, hiring, fixing, worrying, making hard choices, and still showing up to serve. These are honest stories from founders in the thick of it. No fluff, no ego, just the real grind and what's getting them through. If you're building something on your blog, this one's for you. Brought to you by Coffee Futures Fund. All right.
Yes.
Welcome to Layla's TEDx. Layla, I'm supremely excited. Thank you for joining me on this podcast series that we're doing with Coffee Futures Fund, you and I. It's exciting how um, from the moment the genesis of Coffee Futures Fund came into being to how we have scaled from literally nothing to the organization or the momentum it is today. And thank you for staying with us on this journey, providing feedback,
Yeah.
providing guidance, and providing all the support that we could ask for. With that, I just want to be, I'm supremely grateful. And thanks again for taking the time today.
Yes, yeah, I'm excited to chat with you, and I'm excited to support and be along for the ride that is the Coffee Futures Funds as it gets started, and we all learn more about it and how it works and get a chance to see it in real life and hope that it, continues to grow and evolve.
You know, speaking of Coffee Futures Fund, in your decades of experience, you have seen the world, the coffee world, especially from so many angles, right?
Mhm.
So, how do you see in your eyes Coffee Futures Fund taking shape, the larger vision, the grassroots impact? What comes to your mind? How do you picture it?
Well, I think the reality is that coffee, coffee is a big as a commodity is massive, and we know that. But individual coffee shops, people opening up cafes for the first time, it's a very small it's a small scale in terms of the capital involved and so on. And so I think we're in a part of our industry over the last maybe 10 or so years where venture capitalism has become this sort of taboo and scary word. And something like Coffee Futures Fund, I have a feeling that people maybe don't quite understand what something like this is. Is this venture capitalism? What is seed money? This is a little bit different. I think within like the CPG world, the consumer packaged goods, this is a common conversation. Investments, rounds of investments is something that tech companies we are all aware of. But in coffee, if you're opening up an individual coffee shop, most often you're kind of bootstrapping it. Maybe you get a SBA loan. Maybe your parents give you some money, or you start as a pop up and you scrape by until you can do it. So this idea of investment from outside while you're still small, I think people aren't really aware of it and how it works and everything. So I'm excited for this to be a part of the coffee industry, to be a part of more of the mainstream conversation so that people can understand what these options are. I believe that Coffee Futures Fund's biggest hurdle to start is just general awareness and knowledge of what it is, why it would be beneficial for someone to get involved, what you're offering people. I think that's sort of the hurdle or the challenge that's ahead of us is what is this? What is the benefit? Because it's not a common part of this industry right now.
That's very well said, and you're so right because as a student of coffee, right, over many years now, I've seen the investment world from several angles, so to speak. And one thing that I wanted to really ensure that Coffee Futures Fund does right is focusing on the founder, right, focusing on the
Mm-hmm.
owner, because I think that's really important. And when the coffee industry and people say that it has to be owner operated, it has to be owner controlled, I think people take it by heart, and that's one, because again it's the fruit of passion. There's a lot of love and energy and sweat and tears, everything going into it, and people don't just see it from a commercial venture point of view. It's not only about money. Money is possibly an important part but to sustain, but it's not only about money. So how do we balance this, giving owners complete control, making sure they still have complete freedom to do what is right for them, which really speaks to their heart, but at the same time providing that ecosystem to support them in the right way. And when it's the ecosystem, it's not just the money, right? Money can play a really small role. It's a commodity at the end of the day. You can get money from so many different sources. It's about
Yeah.
the mentorship, the guidance, which I believe is a big missing piece. So that's the genesis, and that's the vision.
Yeah. As someone who talks about smart business practices within the coffee retail space, I get so much pushback on some of the concepts that I talk about, that it's coming across, or that way of doing things is very corporate, that you're selling out. And as someone who started at companies like Stumptown Coffee Roasters, that was eventually bought by a much larger business. I worked for them when they were purchased originally by TSG and then later sold to Pete's and so on. So I've seen that process of actually being acquired. Just recently, Black and White was acquired by Fairway Coffee, and this idea of outside investments, this being acquired and so on, is generally associated with this like selling out sort of concept. And I think the big thing that we need to acknowledge here is that everybody has different goals as they build their company. Some people want the freedom of running a business by themselves, that they're passionate about coffee and they don't want to have a boss, and they were working in corporate fields before and they just want the ease and freedom of making their own decisions. And some people are growing a business with the goal to eventually sell the business or to grow it into something else and be a part of something bigger. But I am trying to actively work against the idea that under just having smart business practices is somehow a corporate sellout. Because one of the reasons why I do what I do is that I grew up in specialty coffee. My family started a specialty coffee company in Seattle. My mom and dad started it. My dad was an immigrant from Iran. He was working for one of the longest standing coffee companies, or one of the first European style coffee companies to ever open in Seattle, called B&O Espresso. And my dad was working there as an operations manager. He eventually became a part owner, and then he started Cherry Street Coffee House with my mom. My dad didn't go to school. I mean, he went to school to be a mechanic and then started owning a business. So he didn't go into it with any understanding of how to own and operate a business at all, barely spoke English, let alone new business practices in the United States. So all of what he did and what he learned was just from figuring it out. And I watched him as I grew up struggle with not knowing exactly how to operationally make the business work in his favor and operate in a way that made his life easier. As it continued to grow, it got harder and harder instead of easier and easier. I mean, that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, but one of the biggest things that I've talked about this as where I kind of got my operational mind is that my dad is very much a community-based person. He's connecting with people and he's very outgoing and gregarious and just like brings people into the fold and gets people excited about what he's doing. I'm much more of an introverted person, and I like to take more of the back seat. Like I like to be involved in things. I'm always doing stuff, but I'm sort of like the person behind the scenes a little bit. Like I'm here to support, but I don't necessarily need to be the front and center person. And in that role of kind of being the back of house in some ways, I was seeing all the operational challenges and like, how do we make this easier? So one of the big things being, as you scale, as you start to grow, Cherry Street, started as one coffee company. When it's the biggest point, it was 12 locations, or 10 locations. Yeah, around 10, 12 locations. And one of the big challenges was like, how do you make the experience the same in every one of those locations? Well, a lot of that is just foundational operational things. You need to create those systems and practices, even when you're just one coffee shop, so that when you do have 2, 3, 4, 10 coffee shops, you have that system already built and in place. When I'm talking about smart business practices, I'm talking about things that I believe are foundational to creating a long, sustainable business, but also a really positive work environment for employees. One thing that I've always really considered is that the more that I've worked in the workforce for over 20 years. I've only ever worked in specialty coffee. And one thing that I've learned as I've worked with other people and then eventually went to manage a lot of people is that I really believe that all employees want to show up and do a good work. I don't think that there are these, sometimes owners will talk about, my employees don't listen to me. They don't follow through. They don't follow the rules and things like that. And I actually don't believe that that's true. What I think it is that business owners don't create a system where someone shows up at work each day and knows what good work looks like. What is my job? What am I supposed to be doing? What does good work look like? That's not clearly laid out. And that creates an environment where people don't feel like they're given the tools and the education and training to be great at their job. The common thing that he would say was, when you own a business, you're always putting out fires. There's constantly fires that you're putting out. And I was like, where are the fires starting, and how do we get the fires to stop from the first place? Like, how do I put out the fires? How do I make sure they don't start altogether? So let's identify the problem. Let's fix the problem so that we don't constantly have these fires. And the more and more I'm in the small business world, thankfully with my company now, Gilder, I've had a chance to connect with so many small businesses in the Portland area, not coffee related, just the greater small business ecosystem. And what a lot of them have been around for a long time, and they're just now kind of getting to that point where they're understanding business. Like, man, I've struggled for 10 years. And now I understand that I needed to know this stuff to make my life easier, to be able to grow. One of the sayings is you want to be able to focus on your business, or you want to work on your business, not in your business. And in the beginning, you have to do both, right? You have to focus on one thing. You have to work in the business. There's not a perfect scenario for everything, but you're working in your business and you're working hard in the beginning and you're trying to work on the business. And then you eventually want to be able to kind of pull yourself out so that you can focus on running the business, not doing the day-to-day work. But that requires systems and processes and a financial structure that allows you to step outside of the day-to-day work. So I believe these are all things that are absolutely necessary for long-term sustainable success. Whether or not you struggle and struggle and struggle until you realize that's necessary, or you just accept it from the beginning and say, I'm gonna take this on, I'm gonna learn, because I don't want to spend the next 5 to 10 years constantly worried about payroll and constantly worried about making rent or never having enough cash to buy those pieces of equipment or expand and all that sort of stuff. These are the tools that are necessary to be able to plan for those types of things.
Yeah. So very well said, because as you were speaking, I was imagining all the coffee shop owners that I've met, engaged with over the last 5 years across the world. And this is, Leila, this is so true. This is so true across the board, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, across continents, actually. If you look at Europe, if you look at the US, Indian subcontinent, everywhere is the same thing. I think that that's a
Mm-hmm.
basic structure where it's everyone's working in the business, right? You're putting out fires. Yes, that's become a reality. And I've often seen that people just accept that as a reality. That's
Right.
like part and parcel of the game, right? If you want to play this game, this is the only way to do it.
Yeah.
So, there are two things that I've observed. One, people still do it, right? They know the challenging stuff, but they still do it. So,
Mm-hmm.
which tells me that they're so deeply passionate and connected
Yeah.
to themselves and just want to share the love with the community. So, which is great. Something that I find missing, which something that you said, I want to double click on that aspect, is I feel there's, what's the right word? I think communication, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not just we always, social media, or we try to learn through books or otherwise about how to do communication better. Do you see that too, where as a coffee owner, I'm facing all these problems, it's all in my head, I'm solving it on a day-to-day basis, and I have Leila here in front of me. How do I really communicate my problems so I can actually get the right
Yeah.
answers or guidance to go
Yeah.
back and then apply those, right? So I think that's the starting piece, because problems are there, you have those answers. So how do you fix that communication gap to begin with when you're meeting someone new?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, one of the things that I found as a consultant is oftentimes a lot of the stuff that I do with clients is almost more validation than it is anything else. They know the answer. They just don't see how to get there. And what a consultant oftentimes does is comes in with a completely outside perspective, doesn't understand the history or the deeper challenges and things that are happening, just sees it from an outside perspective and says, this needs to change and this needs to change. And the owner, this happens all the time, will be like, how did I not see that? That is sitting right in front of my face, but I didn't see that. Or I knew that was the answer. I just needed someone to tell me it was the right answer. Those are oftentimes the two things I hear. And the reason for that is it's easy to second guess yourself, because as a business owner, everything falls on your shoulders. If you make a mistake, it's your fault. And you have to pay literally for the consequences of the situation. And so it can sometimes, I know immediately within like the first 4 months of owning my business, I had decision fatigue. I was making so many decisions that I just, for a moment, couldn't make any decisions. It was like, what plates should we buy? And I was like, I've looked at 75 plates. I can't decide which plate. Can someone else make this decision for me? Because I was constantly making massive, big financial and team decisions all the time that I had to deal with. And so oftentimes they'll see what the challenge is, but they just need someone to say, yes, that's the right decision, so that they feel safe and that we can move forward with that. The other side of it is sometimes they know the answer, but they know that answer requires a lot more work. I've been in that situation where I've had a thing where I'm like, yeah, I know the right decision is that I need to let this person go. But if I let them go, that means I have to step in and be the interim person for the next 3 months. And that sounds like way more work than I want to take on. So we sort of stall, even though we know it's the right answer. So those two things happen. And then there's the other side of that, which is the how did I not see that? And that is very common because you are in it. Your head is in the business and you're not looking at the bigger picture, or you're not seeing that, or you're constantly looking at the bigger picture that you aren't seeing those minor details, where I can step in and I'm not clouded by all of the other things that are going on. I'm just looking at what information I can see. And oftentimes your answers are living in plain sight in the information, but we're so clouded by personal feelings and other people's opinions. They're sort of clouding that, but I don't have those. And so I can step in and see that. It's very easy for me. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm better or smarter than you. It's just that I'm a different person that can see it from a different angle.
Yeah. Providing that outside in perspective. Yeah. I love that.
That's it for this episode of Inside the Grind. If something here helped, make sure to subscribe and pass it to another coffee shop or a friend. We all need each other more than we admit. To learn more or join the community, head to coffeefutures.fun. This movement is just getting started. Until next time, keep growing. Your shop matters more than you know.